our readers drew lots to be able to see who was going to read that scripture this morning. So I know you're all just saying right now, thank God that's not me. Not it. Right? Amanda, George, and Chris, you're all like, I even apologized to poor Heidi this morning. Those are great names, aren't they? And I tell my readers, it's not the pronunciation of the name that's the most important. It's understanding more about the scriptures and who's surrounding those people and where those people are coming from. We're going to dig into that a little bit this morning. But first I want to tell you a story. There was a story about a farmer. And he was out on his tractor in his field, and he looked up and he saw a rabbit who came bouncing out of the bush right out into the highway. And a car came barreling down the road of this highway. Without even pausing, the car ran right over the rabbit. Flattened that rabbit right out on the street. The farmer watched, and the driver, he quickly pulled over and got out of his car and went to his trunk, opened up the trunk, and he pulled out this big spray can. He went over to the rabbit, who was completely flattened on the pavement there, and he sprayed over the rabbit, and the rabbit started to twitch. And so he sprays the rabbit again, and the rabbit pops up, and his body is now full size and healthy, and he's breathing. And so once again, the driver, he leans over with one more spray of the can and sprays the rabbit. The rabbit looks up with a smile, and he gets all ready, and he takes 3 hops, and he turns around and he waves to the driver. He takes 3 more hops, and he waves again. He takes 3 more hops, and he waves again, until finally he hops back off into the bush. The driver takes this big spray can and puts it back in the trunk of his car and gets ready to leave, but the farmer yells over, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. He comes running over to the driver and he says, I have to see, what do you have in your trunk? So the driver gets out, and he opens up the trunk, and he pulls out the spray can, and he shows the farmer. Right on the front of the can, it says, hair restoration. With permanent wave. Every time I read that, I laugh. Restoration, it's something that we're all begging for, right? It's a number one thing that happens in life. It's something that we're always thinking about. It's a media frenzy nowadays. And it's been going on for generations and generations. Any of you remember a TV show called This Old House? Yes. Norm had every single tool that had ever been created, and I think he created his own. And I was always amazed watching that with my dad. I was like, well, I could do that if I had all those tools. But it was all about restoration. Most recently on HGTV, you all know the latest and greatest, right? The Fixer-Upper. Chip and Joanna Gaines, the household words nowadays. Like we all want to invite them over, right? And to have cookies and lemonade with them. Their whole show is about restoration. They own a real estate company, Chip, he's that funny, goofy kind of construction worker who's got lots of real manual talent. And then there's Joanna with her wonderful interior design and how she speaks words of common sense into Chip all the time, and the jokes and the banter that happens back and forth. This show became the biggest hit ever. And now there's so many knockoffs that can't even keep track of how many couples and what cities they're in and where they're doing restoration. It became so big that their icon symbol, the magnolia, became the Magnolia House where they lived, and the Magnolia Realty where they had their company, and the Magnolia Market where they opened up a little store that served cupcakes, and then they also had the Magnolia Homes, an entire line of interior decorations you can buy almost anywhere in the world nowadays, and of course the Magnolia Table, a cookbook. It goes on and on and on. Restoration is just this huge thing inside of us that I think it developed from generations ago when we were all reading books about how to diet, how to be healthy, how to think better about ourselves, all about restoring ourselves. The restoration is certainly more than just a fad word. It's been around for such a long time. It means to reconstruct. It means to rejuvenate. It means to repair, to refresh, to renew, to revitalize, to reinstall, to reinstate. kind of get your blood pumping just thinking about it. God loves fixer-uppers. Think about this. The whole entire universe was completely formless. Scriptures say it was void. And then God restored it. And when he was done, he declared it good. The entire Hebrew nation of people, they were impoverished and enslaved. And when God was done, they were blessed and they were free. King David himself was forgotten. He was irrelevant. He was considered a nobody. And then when God restored him, he became the king. Place of prominence. And then there's the story of you and I. The story that's depicted in the book of Romans. It says, for those who love God, all things work together for good. For those who are called according to his purpose. Called. Conformed. Adapted. Restored. All restored, or a restoration project underway to be created and to be the image of God's Son in this world. For Christians, for those who believe, we are a fixer-upper project. God is renovating us to be in the image of Christ. I don't know about you, but most days the transformation of myself into the image of God's Son seems almost impossible. I get up and I look in the morning, I get up and I look in the mirror and I become painfully aware, it's right there in my face, of all the faults and all the failures and all the disappointments and all the opportunities missed and all the times I've turned my back. And I think this is one restoration project that's just never going to happen. Yet there's God's words where he says, you are prearranged. You are conformed. You are a restoration project to be the image of Christ. Well, if you've ever watched any one of those TV shows, you know that there's a whole hour of restoration that's happening, right? It's a process. It's a process that takes time and energy. And it's not just the one show, it's all the shows. The Fixer Upper show is no longer being recorded, but at their very last episode, the dad of the show, Chip, he's planting a magnolia tree, something they've done time and time again for the new homeowners. And he's planting his last magnolia tree, and his children were with him, and he says, do you guys see that magnolia flower? That reminds me of my very first date with your mother. I climbed up into a magnolia tree, and I plucked the flower, and I gave it to her on our very first date. We get a glimpse of what magnolia means to Chip and Joanna Gaines. But then Joanna writes in her book, after finishing the show, she wrote a book, and she says, there's something more about that magnolia, about that symbol that encapsulates Chip and I, and encapsulates our life and our family. She said, now that we've had time to reflect on it, it's as if our whole lives had been preparing for this experience. We didn't know it at the time, but seeds had been planted a long time ago. And those seeds grew into a tree, and the tree had buds. Have you ever seen the bud of a magnolia flower? It's a tight little pod. And it stays closed up for the longest amount of time, and then it sits right at the end of the branch, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it just bursts. And when it bursts, it becomes a gigantic, gorgeous, fragrant flower that's 10 times bigger than the bud itself. It's impossible to imagine that such a big and beautiful thing could come out of a tiny, little, tight bud. But it does. And she said that's exactly what their journey had been like for them. The process of being restored themselves. It's as if their whole lives had been preparing for that experience. I know most of us look around in the basements, the closets, and the attics of our own lives, and we begin to look and we begin to evaluate, and then we become a little filled with anxiety. We agonize over this because we know who we're supposed to be. We know what we're supposed to be like. We know what we're supposed to be working towards. We know it's all about our own personal restoration. Well, let's go back to the book of Zechariah that we've been studying these past couple of weeks, and we'll continue to do so. We're looking at Zechariah and the whole idea of these people who had been exiled to Babylon have now come back. They've returned home. And the idea of being welcomed home, how refreshing that is, and how that fills our hearts and our souls, but still requires some stuff from the people who came back. They were charged with rebuilding the temple, and they got distracted. And so Zechariah is the prophet that God uses to deliver his message. And we're going to look at one particular vision that we find in chapter 6. And it begins with this. Zechariah says to the people, take up a collection this day. He says, go get an offering. He says, go collect the tithe. Go pass the offering plate. Today. Today. He doesn't tell the people, wait until Sunday. He doesn't tell the people, wait until we've all gathered for dinner. He says, go now, today, this day, and take up a collection. It was not only important for them to take the collection to rebuild the temple, but it was important for those people coming back from exile to remember their first and primary spiritual discipline, which is a sacrifice for God. That's why he asks us to give our best. The first, not the last. The best, not the weak. Not the leftovers. When God takes up an offering, he doesn't just pass the plate. He calls people from where they are to someplace new. He called people from Babylon, where they probably hadn't taken an offering in a long time, where they had developed a whole new life after generations and 70 years of being there, and now he's calling them back. It's not a fundraising effort. It's an offering to God. It's an obedience to God. He's calling them back out of a life of sin and destruction that they had in Babylon with no order and no priest to follow them, and calling them back. And the first step is to take the offering. He calls them out of a corrupt land of Babylon, and he calls them into the joy of Jerusalem. You know those really weird names that Heidi read for us, the real difficult kind of pronunciations, and we were thinking, my gosh, where did those names come from? One name meant worldly. The other one is the Lord is good. The other one is Jehovah knows all. And the last one was Jesus saves. They were called. He then says, I want you to take that offering and I want you to fashion 2 crowns. I want you to make 2 crowns. I want you to use your best craftsmen, and I want you to manufacture 2 crowns. But neither one of them should look like the normal turban that you would put on a priest's head. No, we're not going there, says God. We want 2 crowns made with gold and silver circlets. Yeah, kind of like a king would wear. Yeah, kind of like royalty. And then I want you to go ahead and put the 1 crown on the priest's head. What? What you talking about? We don't do that here. That's crazy. Because, in the Old Testament, during those times, there were 2 people of power and in charge. You know who they were? The king and the priest. The king ruled the government. The priest ruled the religion and the faith. The 2 tried to live in harmony, but they never lived together. And now you're telling us to take up an offering and to make a crown that looks like a kingly crown and then to put it on a priest? The office of king, that belonged just to the house of David. The house of priest, the priest only belonged to the house of Levi. fix those. But God said, as God so often does, wait and see what I'm about to do. I'm about to do a new thing. Because that's what restoration's all about, isn't it? It's about taking what you've already got and doing a new thing. Then he says, in the king's throne, the priest and the king become one. For there will be one who will come who will be called the branch. Think magnolia bud. Where was the magnolia bud? It was on the end of the branch. And from that branch, the nation of Israel, the king and the priest will come together. There will be unity and there will be peace. Restoration will take place. Now, perhaps Zechariah was aware that he was giving some kind of prophetic vision of the day as well as of the future. I'm not sure if he knew that. We today often miss the message from God and we think it's all about us and it's all about today. But I'm reminded that often when I pray and I begin to hear the word of the Lord and I believe in the message that I'm receiving, I tend to look at it as an immediate response. Help me through this. Guide me through that. Help my friend with that. Lift up my congregation for this. And sometimes I forget that I need to be looking at this message might not just be for me. It might be for way down the road. Because that's why we restore things, don't we? Isn't that why we restore cars and old furniture? And isn't that why we restore homes? So that there's a way down the road. Zechariah's restoration of the temple was not just a way for God to rebuild the temple, the building that he would live in and dwell amongst his people as they returned, as it was in the past, but it was also so that the plan for restoration of the entire nation could take place. A unified nation. A world with peace. The restoration project is not to go back to the way things were, but to make them even better for going forward. Joanna Gaines would say she'd take the old bones of a house and make them new again. A complete transition. New and improved, if you will. Not just the building and the walls and the roof, but also the union of the priest and the king. I often read a temple not just made of human hands, but one made in the heavens. The branch will come from the nation of Israel. It will be king and priest. They will make peace, and they will open the kingdom to all. Because I have told you this, you now know that restoration of our nation, our families, our temple, and ourselves can happen. Zechariah is speaking words of hope into a group of people who no longer had hope. But we can't miss the last sentence. Because this is so very important to the entire vision that Zechariah is giving them. The last sentence said, if you diligently obey the voice of the Lord your God, faith comes before restoration. In Colossians, the letter to the Colossians, he says, he is the head of the body of the church. He's the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he might come to have first place. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him was pleased to reconcile himself to all things. All things, whether on earth or in heaven, by making peace through the blood of his cross. God is in the restoration business. He's the greatest contractor you'll ever meet. And think about it, if God can completely restore a void and empty universe into everything that you see and you experience today. And God can call that good. If God can restore an entire nation of Israel, if God can rebuild not only a building called the temple, but he can also rebuild an entire faith, how much can he do in you? Romans 5:17 says, "For if by the trespasses of one man, Adam, death reigned through that man, how much more will those who receive God's abundant grace and the gift of righteousness reign in life through one man, Jesus Christ?" God's grace is so abundant that he restores us to better than new. He calls us new and improved every day we wake up, and every day we practice our spiritual disciplines. When we put our heads on the pillow, we were better than when we got up. Remember these words from probably the most favorite psalm ever read. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. God is the greatest restoration expert ever. This building you're sitting in right now is not a museum for saints. It's not where we hang plaques to those people who have gone before. It's a hospital. It's a hospital for sinners like you and me. It's a place for people who have messed up, who have fallen short, who have done wrong, who have slipped and fallen, who have made a mistake that they've seen, or perhaps who they have not yet seen. It's for those people who have come here saying they need help. It's a place for people whose foundations have been cracked. It's a place for people whose roofs are leaking. It's for people whose walls need scraping and covering with something new. It's a place of restoration. Zechariah's message to the people of the day was about rebuilding a building. And it was about calling people back to God through remembering and reassuring all the hope and the messages they have been given and all the times that God has lifted them and carried them and provided for them. But still, the people thought that their efforts made very little difference. They felt like there was more pressing matters urgently in today's world. They felt no hope for the future. And so Zechariah comes to them and says, "No, I have a message from the Lord. The Lord has given me a vision. You are a work in process. And the way we restore this building is the way he's restoring you." He says, we're not only building a building, we're building ourselves. And we are the greatest project God has ever worked on. And for those who believe, we are the fixer-upper. There's a great question that Joanna Gaines asked at the end of every show. Are you ready for your fixer-upper?